Storytelling is literally a fundamental way that human beings connect with other human beings. It's that big of a thing. Those are the 4 potential models for adding story into your listicle so your listicle doesn't feel like a list.
Enter Jeff, the mastermind.
I'm dreaming, oh, I believe in this dream I've been dreaming, oh, I'm dreaming, oh, I believe in this dream I've been dreaming, oh.
Okay, Believe Nation, I want to introduce you to a friend of mine that hasn't been on the channel before. His name is Jeff. He is a master at helping YouTubers tell stories. His background is in film, and we'll get into that. And I'm trying to figure out, how do I get to 10 million subscribers on my main channel? And I want to figure out if I can do it through better storytelling. So Jeff, welcome aboard, man.
Awesome. Good to be here, man.
You want to tell my audience just super quick about your background and what you do?
Sure. My background is in broadcast television editing. I'm literally sitting in the edit bay. I'm on a gig right now. I'm editing for NBC. It's a show called American Ninja Warrior. It airs primetime like Wednesday. Crap, I don't even remember what night it airs, but it's a massive hit show on NBC. It's in its 11th season, and it's a really cool show. And it has some very direct effect on what we're going to be talking about. Ooh. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, I spent almost 20 years back. Going back about 20 years here in Hollywood, and I've been learning how to craft content, and I've been doing it for some of the largest media outlets in the world. So I've cut for NBC, ABC, Universal, Disney, ESPN, Apple, MTV, you name it. That's what I do. And since the last couple of years here, I've actually expanded into becoming an active YouTube creator myself. And so I found that to be a really rare balance between the folks who have the perspective from Hollywood and actually have the perspective on YouTube as well.
Cool. So I've been following Jeff's channel for a while. I'm definitely in the first 100 of subscribers to his channel. Is it still called Project Greenlight? It
is called Story Greenlight. If you go to storygreenlight.com.
So I've been following Jeff's work for a while. We've chatted offline a whole bunch of times. If you want to learn how to tell better stories in your videos, he's the guy to go to. I've struggled with a bunch of storytelling on my main channel because we do listicles, right? A lot of the top 10 rules you can learn from somebody, and I'm constantly trying to figure out how can we up the game? Like, it's great of what I've done, but if I keep going with just what I've done, I'll keep getting what I'm getting. And it's great, 2 million subscribers, awesome, but I want to get to 10. It's going to take me way too long to get there. So I'm constantly looking to break the mold, break the way things are done, and trying to figure out if I can pick your brain, learn from Hollywood, and figure out how I can tell better stories within the format that I'm playing with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's, I mean, and you kind of touched on it right there. The idea of the number one challenge that I see is that you've built your format around listicles. It feels like a list because that's what it is.
Right.
And so the challenge is, okay, how can we make a listicle not feel like a list?
Yes.
And I feel like this is a really great conversation to have.
Enter Jeff, the mastermind.
Cool.
Okay, Jeff, here we go.
So just as a point of reference, I figured what we can do is just get some overall big picture ideas as like expectations. And then we can dig into what story is and what it isn't. And then I have some models that we can apply to your top 10 series.
All right.
So,
yes.
So let's jump in. I figured we kind of talked about why you want to talk about stories. Like, do you have anything to add? Is like, why do you think that story is something worth your time?
This is Guy Jeff on YouTube, who I listen to all the time, and he says it's important. So I pay attention. In my head, why? A couple things. One, I guess, when it's a story, people learn the lesson a lot through stories instead of only giving factual evidence, and keeping people interested and engaged and following along and watching. And then I guess also just being able to see yourself in that person and relatable to you, to see where they came from and what they're going through and how they overcame is is common for all the people that I profile. And so being able to see a bit of yourself in the person, to see that it's not, oh, it's Steve Jobs and I can't relate to that person because I'll never be like him because of this. Well, no, like he started with less than what you have right now, and
Right.
you do it too. So to make it more relatable, ultimately, I want people to take action, right? Like I'm trying to teach something because I have a message. I want people to grow their business. I want them to feel like they can. I want them to do something, not just watch the video. And I think the best videos with the best stories, yes, it's entertaining, but it also makes you think, makes you reflect, and hopefully make a change in your life as well, walking out of the theater.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and one of the things about stories is, and it's kind of a hot buzzword. Well, it's not kind of, it's like a super hot buzzword in marketing right now, just in general, because there is so much content on so many social media platforms. There is so much crap flying around everywhere. And there is so much that is inconsequential that when people get a chance to latch onto something that has some meat to it, that they're like, oh, I get that. I feel that. I relate to that. Like you're saying, that's being hailed by all sorts of marketers. Like I'm getting these emails. I'm on marketers' email lists, and they're like, have you heard about this new thing? It's called storytelling. It's like connecting with people. I'm like, yes, agreed. Agreed. It's this amazing thing. It's been around since cave people scribbled on walls. Storytelling is literally a fundamental way that human beings connect with other human beings. It's that big of a thing. And so when we get some ideas in place with that and we apply it to our content that we're creating, it's super, super powerful. When it comes to what story is, there are a lot of people that are just like, oh, well, yeah, you got to tell a story. And then they think it's like, oh, well, it's this crazy, crazy involved thing. And the fact of the matter is, it can be. A lot of people think that when you're telling a story, it's like, oh, well, it's not crazy complex at all. It's just this, like, I did this thing. I had a beginning and middle and an end, and that's it. That's my story. They are also right. So it's like the way that I like to approach the idea of a story is, don't think of it as simple or complex. Just think of it as a continuum where you have a framework. Think of a story as a framework. And it can be something super, super complex. I mean, like if you're wanting to build a popcorn stand or like a lemonade stand, that's a structure that needs a framework. If you're wanting to build a skyscraper, that also very much needs a framework. It just varies in scope and scale. So both of them need it, but it just varies in complexity and how it works. And obviously, like, a lot of this. I just want to get a lot of this in place, just foundationally, certainly for folks who are watching this conversation with us here. So going back to the idea of a framework, you have TVs, you have TV shows, you have feature films, and it involves a long stretch of attention. It's a big ask for people to get that kind of attention. Mm-hmm. And so when you have a lot of attention required, you need a lot of framework with a lot of moving parts to keep people engaged. The great flip side to that is, with YouTube, you don't have to have the necessary complexity. It's not required because, number one, most people aren't going to sit and watch like a super, super long video on YouTube. I mean, it does happen, but it's not the norm. So the good news for us as creators is that we get the chance to really focus on the core of what a story is. So we've talked about the core idea of what a story is. Actually, let me back up. A lot of people, when they hear about the concept of a story, they think about something called the hero's journey. The hero's journey is popularly attributed to the author Joseph Campbell, and he came up with it. He published a book on it in 1949 called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he has what he calls a monomyth that is like this. It's this unifying theory that every hero's story goes through, and you can see if you look up hero's journey online, you can see like it's usually a circular diagram, and there are varying levels of complexity to it. Campbell had 17 steps to it. Like, this is the thing that always happens in all these stories. Yeah. So initially he had 17, and then other people have taken it down and condensed it since then. It's it's uncanny how this framework applies to some of these epic stories that we hear about. And a lot of the time when I'm talking about story on YouTube, a lot of the time I just reference the hero's journey and I just kind of move past it, because it supports a complexity of storytelling that most YouTube content doesn't need. The reason I'm kind of talking a little bit about more here is because of your content is dealing with epic people doing epic things.
Yep.
And so that's, that's definitely something to keep in mind. And still, given that your stuff is mainly shorter format, like what's the average length of a top 10, would you say? It's like, my gut reaction is like, it's about 10 minutes. Is that accurate?
Probably a little light. I would say around 15.
Okay.
Some of them are 10. That's few. Some of them go over 20. But I would say 15 as an average. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, that's right. That's a perfect length. I mean, where if you were to take out a lot of story elements to keep people's attention for 15 minutes, one might start struggling. But the thing that I usually talk about to help people really wrap their head around this, and you and I have talked about this in the past, it's this idea that I initially heard verbalized by a writer by the name of Donald Miller in a book called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, How I Learned How to Live a Better Life. And he talks about, and it's the idea of this guy, the author. He actually had a semi-autobiographical book that he made, and it turned into this huge bestseller. And then the dust settled, and then he's like, okay, what do I do next? And next thing you know, he's sitting on the couch eating Cheetos and wondering why his life has no meaning. And so he gets approached by a couple filmmakers who say, we love your book. We want to turn your book into a movie. And so that process of turning what he had written of his book into a movie, that's his framework that he talks about, how he learns to apply story concepts from his book to his movie, but also learns to apply it to his life at the same time. It's a super cool story. And so he talks about how at the core of it, a story is about when a character wants something and overcomes conflict to get it. That's what Miller lays out in his book. A story is about a character who wants something and overcomes conflict to get it. And I was thinking about that, and I was just like, there's something missing to this, because because the whole point of stories is that it starts in one place and it ends up in another. There's a change. There's a transformation. It goes from one place and it goes to another place. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to take Miller's idea and I'm going to add my own line to it. A story is about when a character wants something, overcomes conflict to get it, and is transformed as a result, or experiences transformation as a result. Because that's really the juice of that's really the payoff. There's like this, I started this and ended up that, and that's why it's like, you think about like the Matrix movies. It is a classic hero's journey in terms of Neo starts out in his cubicle world, and he gets sucked into this rabbit hole, and the next thing you know, he is the chosen one leading the fight of humanity to survive against the machines. When you have a really strong story concept like that, you can distill it down, and you don't have to have a lot of moving parts. So you can have the hero's journey, you can have that distilled idea of character who wants something and overcomes conflict to get it and is transformed. You can distill it down even more to the idea of change or transformation. So the reason I'm talking about this so much is because this is directly applicable to your content. When you have the opportunity to show transformation or change in your characters, that is the core. That is the core right there. Any gut reaction so far?
You've made tons of videos on this. I screenshotted one of your videos on your channel where you show all those 3 points. I took a copy of that. I sent it to my team and said, how do we do this?
Yeah.
This is what Jeff says to do. How do we apply it to our videos? And the thing that we actually came up with was, so on my newer top 10 videos, we'll do a quick introduction of the person, who they are, their background, what they came from, and then it gets into the 10 points. So in there, we have an ability to do a micro storytelling. It is their story. It's, you may know who this person is, you may not know. And even if you do know them, gives you a little bit more context as to where they came from, because you may not know that. So I sent it to my guy, and the first thing he did was he took Grant Cardone.
Okay.
And we have a partnership with Grant and done a lot of content on him. And I said, rework your sentences, because we'll have 4 to 5 sentences on the person before the first clip plays. Rework your sentences to follow Jeff's formula. The second one, the 3 parts.
Okay.
And he started with the goal, right? A hero, he wants something. A character wants something. And so what we found was, at least for us, the thing that was missing was saying the background of where he came from before. Like Grant was addicted to drugs and never, didn't know, had no plans, didn't want anything yet. He was addicted to drugs. He was checked into his, he had to check into a drug facility because he was going to get kicked out of his family. Like his mom said, you can't keep being addicted to drugs. He decided to get sober, not be a drug addict. And then again, he was addicted to drugs. And his mom said, you are out of the family unless you go and figure out a way to get clean. So he checked into a clinic and started taking his life more seriously, and then came out and started trying to drive forward and wanted freedom. And then by 25, I think, became a millionaire, and then kept going off and doing more things. Or maybe he was in the home by 25, and by 30 he was a millionaire, something like that. So maybe it's just we don't understand, or we messed up, because the first sentence was something like, Grant Cardone wanted to build an empire to inspire people to have freedom, or something like that. But the piece that was missing was the earlier part of, man, like, you think your life sucks. Imagine being addicted to drugs and alcohol and almost being kicked out of your family. Like that sucks. And so to see somebody, so I think the piece that we're missing, or maybe we don't know how to put it into your format, was how do we show what they came from before they even wanted anything? Like the call to action. Like Neo didn't want to be the hero. He became the hero. He was picked. But you can relate to his life before he was picked. Like,
yeah. Well, so, and Neo, you're exactly right. I mean, like, the idea of what the character wants is not automatically clear at the beginning.
Right.
So when you're crafting like a hook, like an opening hook for something, it's okay to skip around in time in terms of dropping the bullet points of what people want. Stories do not necessarily have to be linear. They definitely don't have to be linear. I mean, and I think you'll find that really helpful as we continue the conversation here. And also I will say, it may not be, the opening hook may not be the place to dig hugely into his background beyond saying, like, after Grant Cardone did X amazing thing, after suffering through drug addiction, nearly being kicked out of his family, blah, 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 blah. And now he wants to do this. It's like, probably within, with your content, it's most important to lead with the holy crap, this is incredible, this is why this person is amazing. Then to work a bit of the background into the next sentence or two, because you have to talk about here, because this is a really, really big deal. When you have a story, you have to have this, like, when you want a truly satisfying outcome to any story, there has to be truly significant obstacles in the way
Yes.
of that character getting there. And that's where that's why that idea of obstacles, I mean, it's the middle beat of that condensed master story framework. And not coincidentally, it's also like if you break down TV shows or movies into acts like a play, people talk about 3-act structure, act 1, 2, and 3. You have screenwriters who are just like, yes, I'm good with act 1. Yes, I know what the climax is going to be and how it's going to resolve in act 3. It's that act 2 that just kills me. I cannot tell you how many conversations I've heard and articles I've read about professional storytellers saying act 2 is just the killer, because that's where all that obstacle stuff, all the moving parts come into play.
Okay.
That's something that absolutely needs to be in place, because especially with your epic, the epic people that you're featuring, there always has to be a clear idea of what the obstacles are. Sure.
Should we lead with Grant Cardone, some fact, like what has he done? So Grant Cardone is a X-time New York Times best-selling author and has sold and owns $500 million in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not how he started. At age 25, he was kicked out of his home because of drug addiction and had to get checked into a clinic. Like, is that what you want? Is that what you're thinking?
I think that might be the format. I don't know that you need to be that specific. I don't know that the hook is the place to like lay out all the beats.
Okay.
But like just think of it as the headlines. So headline, accomplishment, and I just say it's like I'm not always necessarily the best person to think about stuff up on the fly.
That's okay.
Which is why I've built my career sitting in a room like this as an editor, because I have room to sit and think.
Yeah,
So.
sure.
So it's just one of those things. Cardone has this great big thing he accomplished. He had to get through this, and he had to get through this and this and this to accomplish it. Find out how he did it. What's your gut reaction to that idea, to that format?
My gut reaction is the thing that's coming up is not necessarily how he did it. It's now his advice on how you can achieve success.
That's very true. Because the bulk of the content is the advice.
Yeah.
So
find out his advice, and what we could do if you take more time to think about it, whatever, we can show the final version of what that would look like on a worked out model. But something like find out his advice. So you want me to say, here's what he's done. He's multiple time New York bestseller author and owns $500 million in real estate. But to get there, he had to go through almost being kicked out of his family, being a drug addict, and whatever else, right? Almost committing suicide.
Mm-hmm. Is it, well, yeah. I mean, that's to the point where he almost committed suicide.
I'm not 100% on that. I just kind of threw that in there. But let's say
okay.
he did.
Okay.
You might have, right? But then, so okay, and almost committing suicide. Find out his advice on how to achieve success. Like how do we bring it into then rule 1, believe in yourself.
Yeah. Well, that's that kind of that's going to lead into that's going to be informed by what model of format you get into, which, and heck, maybe now's the time to jump into some of these different models that you can apply to like the overall piece. As we discussed briefly, the main challenge that I see right now is the listicle feels like a list. When I see your stuff on Instagram and I see Grant Cardone's picture, or I see Oprah's picture, I see Steve Jobs' picture, and there's the list of stuff, I'm just like, wow, that's quite the list. And it's easy to get lost in all the things, you know.
Sure. Yep.
So here's some thoughts on how you might consider reformatting the way these things unfold. The meat will continue to be the advice, as they always have been, but I want you to think about how to order them and which elements to pick and why and in what order. So one model is you could literally apply the classic the classic story structure to a character. I was about to say, I mean, you can start from the beginning of Grant's story and progress through the end. I mean, that, you know, the linear progression is always an option, but as soon as I'm saying that, it might be good to do exactly what you did in the opening hook, but just in an expanded way. So, like, you can lead off potentially and say, include nuggets of story at the beginning, like include a nugget of story about his huge accomplishment, how he's set up his venture capital fund. It's funded with $82 billion or whatever it is, and then whatever your pieces of advice are, tag them to that, and tag the first piece of advice that would make the most sense to someone who's running that venture capital firm. Then when as you continue opening up his story, you go back in time and you say, he wasn't, you know, this did not happen overnight, and it did not come easily. When he was 25 years old, blah, 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 blah. And then when you have this idea of, you know, talking about his obstacles and all his struggles, do you typically find that there are pieces of advice? Well, there have to be pieces of advice that speak to how to deal with struggle, or how he dealt with a certain, you know, like how does one deal with addictive behavior? If there is an element within your top 10 list that can speak to that story beat, maybe that's a way that you can hook those together. Maybe just having like the overall progression of his story and dropping in the top 10 pieces of advice in whatever way that makes most sense with the specific story beats.
That's interesting. So I think in general, we've actually avoided that stuff.
Okay, because
it's too specific.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, I don't know that we've ever had a Grant clip talk about addiction. Now, I'm sure he's talked about addiction somewhere on all of the mountains of content that he's created.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's too specific, then it's not interesting. It doesn't hit enough of an audience.
For the people who haven't dealt with addiction.
Right.
And just to clarify, I would say it doesn't necessarily have to be, if the story beat, you know, if you're laying out and unfolding the story of Grant, the character, and he's in a place where he's dealing with addiction, the advice doesn't necessarily have to be right on the nose. This is how to deal with addiction.
Right.
You know, if in the writing of your script, it can be something about he realized that he had an issue with self-control. Does Grant talk about self-control?
Right.
Or something like that.
Right. Right.
So where it's something that's more general.
And so are you suggesting that right now we'll do a quick intro, I don't know, 4 lines, and then we'll go rule number 1, do 2, 3, 4. Are you suggesting that in between each rule, we tell a little bit more of the story and how it relates? Yeah,
I would say I mean, this is one potential model.
Yeah.
So the potential model here is frame it around the actual story, lead off with the story as its success. Start ping-ponging back and forth between story beats and the pieces of advice in the way that makes most sense for the particular person. So it's not based around let's count down the list. It's let me tell you the story of this person, and here are the top 10 pieces of advice that we find along the way. That's one potential model.
Okay.
So potential model number 2 is the idea of open story loops and progressive revelation. Are you familiar with the gentleman by the name of Paul Harvey?
Maybe.
Okay. Paul Harvey was, he died in like 2009 or something like that at the age of like 90 or something. He, for decades and decades, was a beloved radio announcer. He had a radio show called Paul Harvey News and Commentary. And I grew up listening to Paul Harvey on the radio as I was riding in my family's car, as like Dad would drive me to school, and we always hear Paul Harvey in the morning. And so he had his flagship show, Paul Harvey News and Commentary. But in the afternoons, we would hear Paul Harvey, and he talks about, and his other show is called The Rest of the Story.
Oh, yeah. And that's the rest of the story.
Yeah. So you have, it's, you hear Paul say hello, and he starts telling you the story about a guy named Jack. And he talks about how Jack got into an argument on the playground when he was a kid, and he figured out how to relate with people. And the story unfolds until he comes to a place where Jack is in a place where there is the possibility that the world will go up in nuclear flames. And he had to use those ideas that he learned as a kid on the playground to keep the world from being blown up by nuclear bombs. And you find out that Jack is actually John F. Kennedy, and it's talking about the Cuban nuclear crisis. And as Paul Harvey would say, it's like, and now you know the rest of the story, So it's the idea of opening up, of telling a story and adding a twist at the end. So sometimes that will apply to certain people, like a big element, a surprise that you might not know about them. That's something that you could pepper in at the beginning, and then you could go through your list in a more standardized way. As long as you hook people's attention at the very beginning, in some way, in whatever way works with the specific character and the specific story. When you get that surprise reveal at the end, a la the rest of the story, that's a potential format. Got reactions to that? Does anyone come to mind that might be a fit for?
I'm seeing pros and cons already come to mind. I think that for the pro, or how we're doing it, is anytime we find some kind of funny or different clip of that person, we use it as number 10. So our last rule.
Okay.
Under, have fun, or sometimes perform amazingly if they're doing a stand-up gig or a show or something. But the have fun one would be something silly, bloopers, something behind the scenes. Kevin O'Leary, the Shark Tank guy, who you think is like this mean, nasty guy, is sitting on his deck playing guitar, and talking about wine, and just something unexpected. We can't always do that, but whenever we can find a fun, different kind of thing, then we always include that as number 10. We don't tease it. There's no reveal. There's no lead up to it. It feels like a normal list. And then, oh, that was wild. And you're sucked into this weird, funny, different kind of thing. Again, we can't do it for everybody, but we always try when we can find it. So that's the pro. The con that comes to mind is, I'm just thinking, how do we, like, they know the character, right? So it can't be, and it's Grant Cardone,
Right.
By rule number 10. Like, well, what do we do for the first 9 rules?
Yeah.
So they're clicking on something to learn about this person. But I get what you're saying. Like, it's a piece of them that you may not know. It's not the character is unknown, like the way that Paul Harvey does it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously in the top 10 context, the reveal of the person it's not going to fit. Right. But yeah, definitely the idea of, if you can do it like this. One of my coaching clients she did something that you think would never work, but it totally works. A client of mine has a DIY furniture that does DIY furniture refinishing.
Okay.
And she's very well established. I mean, she's got like 180,000 subscribers and everything, and she has retail, like she sells. Yeah, she has a whole business model built around her channel. So a lot of what her channel does is demonstrates the product that she sells. And what she started doing is she takes one story, one personal story, and she literally goes back and forth, A, B, A, B, A, B, throughout the entire thing. And so it's like she's talking about a love story where she was dating this guy back in college 20 or 30 years ago and blah, blah, blah. Next thing you know, you're in a montage of refurnishing a chest of drawers. And you're like, this feels really, you would not have expected it. But the way that it just goes back and forth, it totally works. And the engagement on her videos has just went through the roof, where people were leaving like a one sentence comment. They're now leaving paragraphs, and they're just like that kind of thing. So maybe in this context here, maybe you could actually do like one particular story that's like representative of the character themselves, and you can string out that story in chunks throughout the piece. And if there is
chunks and throughout the piece, but then also having advice in between, that relate to that piece.
It doesn't necessarily have to relate to that piece. I mean, it's entirely possible, just kind of spitballing here.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible that you can have an ongoing story. You switch the format to, okay, here's number 10, no, here's items number 4 and number 5, and then you go back to the story, then number 6 and number 7. They might have nothing to do with each other whatsoever. But the fact that you have one storyline unfolding throughout all that piece could be the through line that ties it all together. And especially when you get some sort of satisfying resolution at the end that helps people understand a new piece of this person, etc.
I like it. I think it'll keep people on board longer, like they want to see what happens next, and we have to train the formatting and the storytelling part there, but I think it's good. The thing I'm worried about is they just forget that if we start telling a story and then if we do Grant, for example, how did he get $500 million in real estate? Well, he started here, and then this was his first deal, and then he did, and we can splice that up into 10 different pieces, but in between.
I don't know if I don't know if you might want to. I don't know if you want to cut it up that much. Maybe even just like cut it into like 5 pieces.
Okay.
Cut it into 5 pieces, and then just like do chunks of 2 pieces of advice.
Okay, so that makes the time in between pieces even bigger.
Now, well, but then that would also depend on how long your pieces of advice are.
Right. Well, some of them are
lengthy.
A minute, and some of them, like if you look 15 minutes for video, let's say it'll average to be just over a minute per piece of advice, intro, extra, all that kind of stuff. I guess what I'm thinking is if Grant drops some fire knowledge on rule number 3 and 4, and like, man, that was really good, and they're now thinking about what they just learned, and then like, you come, oh yeah, we're talking about a story too, and then you're back to the story. Do you lose people? Do they forget what happened because there's so much thinking that happens in between?
My gut reaction would be no, because as of right now, well, and obviously the answer is to test it and see see if people have reactions, and like Hollywood is known for running gobs and gobs of test screenings and like asking people their opinions, but the thing is, people are a lot more capable of assimilating structure and ideas than we often give them credit. And when I say we, like I'm mainly pointing the finger at the collective Hollywood here,
right.
Because like it literally often comes down to I've been told in my career by a television executive, Jeff, you can't make this, you're being too subtle. You can't make this subtle. We need everything to be completely plain and obvious, because And sometimes they come right out and say, because the audience is dumb. That's the message that I've gotten pounded into my head for years, shaping television content. Whereas if you go to the typical film director, they're just like, no, I'm not going to show everything and be completely obvious, because number one, the people that I want to watch, that I want to have watching my film, I believe that they're smart and I want to have them engaged, and they're capable of that. And so that's what we find within the film and the scripted television world. People can figure out a lot of different stuff. People can keep track of a lot of different stuff without getting lost. So that's my gut reaction.
Yeah, and as you're talking, I'm also thinking of the shows that we watch. There are multiple storylines that are happening, and they often bounce between characters to see what's happening. So there's something there. Can we find enough stories?
You'd want to look for one killer story per person. You wouldn't have to have a whole bunch of them.
Well, we do volumes. We'll do like volume.
Okay.
10. So then we need 10 different stories over time of that. Like we need a new story every month on that person if they're doing really well. But I get it. And then in thinking about what we call it, it could also tie into that story, 10 Rules for Success, and how he built a $500 million real estate empire or something like that. I'm liking it. There's something there. So
the first model is consider like applying the classic story structure throughout and alternate chunks of and tie ideas of the top 10 advice to that story. The second idea is to have one story, preferably with some sort of surprise or some sort of reveal or interesting idea. You're opening up a story loop at the beginning and you're stringing people along until you get to the end. And you literally just go A, B, A, B. You just cut back and forth between the pieces of advice and this one story as it's unfolding. So potential model number 3, the idea of not so much a story, but more like a theme. So like most of this stuff that I'm suggesting would probably be the stuff that you would lead with, and it would be interspersed with the pieces of advice, because that would be the offering. These ideas would be the offering to make the listicle not feel like a listicle. Okay, so like right now, when you watch a video, here's what we do, and I'm totally open to changing it. Like we're gonna Jeff this beast and turn it into something amazing. Coming ups will be the start. What'll be highlights from the 10 pieces of advice. Try to pick the most emotional moments. Think about like previews or like coming up next on next week's episode of The Flash, something. So that kind of maybe 30 seconds of coming ups, highlighting 3 to 5 tiny little clips. No story super tied into it or kind of theme to it, just the most emotional clips in highlights. 30 seconds of that. Then it'll be their story. So as the theme, we have a theme song. As the theme music runs, you see B-roll of the person, and then their story shows as text on screen. Sure. 4 to 5 sentences. That's where we would say, Grant Cardone suffered from XYZ. We would start with the pain and where he came from, and then what he ultimately became, and then here are his 10 rules for success. And then we go rule number 1, 2, 3, 4 into the whole list. So coming up's story over the theme song, and then the 10 points is what it is right now. But I'm open to radical change. Right. Well, in that case, I mean, definitely, if you're going to implement any of these models, I would strongly suggest adding whatever the most important hook from whatever story you're adding, that needs to go up front too. Because if it's a strong enough story, if it has a strong enough question, that will help people want to find out the answer to that, instead of just saying, oh, well, I want to see him say this soundbite and that soundbite.
Right.
That should definitely be up front as well. So the idea of potentially building this around a theme. You think about Elon Musk, he has dealt with a lot of haters and a lot of doubters over the years. So, when he was setting up PayPal, everyone was just like, who do you think you are taking on the banking industry?
Right.
When he was like working with Tesla, I mean, for years, Tesla was just dying because everyone was just like, okay, no, like the entire automotive industry was just like, no, you're not going, you should not be allowed to do this. Like lobbyists and all the things. It's like he had huge regulatory hurdles that he had to get over. And, and then you go through SpaceX and you have the general opinion of the public. It's just like, oh, well, only governments can do that. I mean, you have, and I don't know all the details of the hurdles that he's had to overcome for SpaceX, but guaranteed they have been significant. And they're guaranteed there have been people who have doubted him. Mm-hmm. So it's like you have that through line of Elon Musk overcoming the haters or overcoming the conquering the doubters or that kind of a thing. That's a potential theme that you could hang the pieces of advice on. With a lot of this, it might end up shaping and deciding what the pieces of advice actually are. I don't know how easy it is or like how much extra in terms of like specific pieces of advice you have for any given person. It's like, or is it just like, or is it you're scraping to get 10? I can't imagine it's that because I mean, like you're doing episode after episode on some of these folks.
Well, I mean, it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Finding quality content is a ton of work. Mm-hmm. The two challenges are, one, for some people, there's just not enough content. Like John Travolta, we can't do a top 10 on. He just doesn't talk in interviews.
Yeah.
He had these quick one-liners and doesn't say anything. And so there's nothing we can even do one volume on. Like we struggled to get 4 rules of his entire career of interviews on TV. Someone like Gary or Grant, they have so much content, but are often saying the same thing. Right. Just different words, or it's like same themes, just a different way of saying it, or a different story that they're telling, or again, different words, different setting. So we'll use it again to reinforce the message, but not use the exact same clip. They're somewhere else telling it slightly differently. Mm-hmm. But it's the same, Gary has his thing and Grant has his thing, and they don't talk about 1,000 different things. And so they have a lot of content, but we're reusing a lot of the similar themes. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, so that's, if you think about the overall character of a person, if there's a strong theme that you can talk about and you can connect different stages of their life together like that, that's potential model number 3, like building the piece around a theme. Like with Oprah, she didn't want to, think of it as like she's like about going to the next level, always going to the next level. She didn't want to be just a television host. She wanted to run the show. She didn't want to just run the show. She wanted to own the production company. She didn't want to just run the production company. She wanted to own the syndication. And then she wanted to, all that. She's continually upping the game. So that's, I think it's, we have a series called Mentor Me, which runs once a week on the channel, which basically is that, but still in a listicle format, where it's, it would be all on one theme. So it'd be Grant Cardone on real estate. Okay. And then not 10, depends on how many we find, 5 clips on him just talking about real estate and different advice. Buy low, sell high, never use your own money, or like whatever he would say. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all, no story weaved in, but it's all around the theme of real estate. Mm-hmm. And we'll do that for different people. Gary Vee on social media, same thing. You take 6 points and it's only him and only talking about social media. Cool. It kind of feels like this, but no, there's no theme or story in what we're doing right now in between, apart from just having that top level story. Yeah.
Well, so just to so to get this out there, the 4th potential model, build build the piece around a character arc, you know, because the character arc, that is the essence of story right there. It is talking about, I started out here, I ended up there. I used to think this, but now I think that. That's why, you know, the song Amazing Grace has such resonance with so many people. It's like, I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. Just that kind of a thing. It's a super, super deep thing. And the idea that came to mind for me was actually with Steve Jobs. Are you familiar with Ed Catmull's book, Creativity Inc.?
I haven't read it. I know of it.
So Ed Catmull, it was one of the founders of Pixar, like the original founders before Steve came into the picture.
I may have it.
Okay.
I feel like I started reading it, but I stopped and gave it away because I didn't care so much about is it very like his personal story?
Actually,
like he quit his job and he went to Pixar, and Jobs like saw him on the first day, but they were massively under-resourced, but the technology was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Was that it? I think that's
it. That's part of it.
Okay.
But
I think I
I
stopped
will
reading that, but maybe I missed the best part. So
well,
Evan,
I will
don't be an idiot. Go get that book again. Here we go. Jeff is going to drop some knowledge.
well, I will say, Atmel, he throughout that book, if you look at how he actually structures the book itself, I mean, it's all about stories along the way and tied to lessons that he's learned about the development of Pixar. But one of the things that he also weaves in there is the character arc of Steve Jobs. Everyone hears Steve Jobs and they think of this hard-charging, take no prisoners jerk, basically, is his popular image. But when you get more into what Catmull talks about, how he related with Steve in his later years and how he saw Steve change, it was, he laid out a picture of Steve Jobs that I had never heard before from anyone, to the point where it's like, this was not the same Steve Jobs that screamed at engineers before the launch day for the iMac or whatever. It's like, this was a man who had discovered how to be a human being and how to empathize, you know?
Yeah.
And and when it came to the point in the story where Steve Jobs dies, I was grieving. Just thinking about it right now, I'm just getting a little bit emotional because of the way that he laid out the change in Jobs' character. Again, with all these ideas, they may or may not apply to the person that you're featuring. You may or may not have a way to display that change. But damn, dude, if you can provide an insight into the shifting of people's character over time, and you know, that's hugely, hugely powerful stuff. And again, with all these other models, you would end up, it would probably end up working where you drop the nugget, like you drop a teaser nugget of this in the very beginning of the episode, like with the other coming up sound ups, and then you just cut back and forth between as you go.
I think the main thing that I'm getting from it here too is we have to show their transformation.
Absolutely. Because there are two kinds of transformation. I mean, there are two kinds of conflict and transformation. It's like you have external conflict and external transformation. So you have, you know, you're like two armies battling against each other. That's an external conflict. You have an external transformation where you have a bare plot of land, and next thing you know, you have a skyscraper on it. So that's one thing. But then, you know, that's pretty straightforward. But when you talk about an internal conflict and internal transformation, that's the stuff where people talk, that's the stuff that happens inside people's hearts and minds. And that's the stuff that's most difficult to actually have happen in real life. And not gonna lie, it is difficult to show an internal transformation in media. But when you can do it well, It sucks people in. It helps people identify. It helps people understand each other. It helps people connect with each other. It is incredibly, incredibly powerful. Those are the 4 potential models for adding story into your listicles so your listicle doesn't feel like a list.
Right. I love it. Definitely some good things to chew on and a lot more context to take back to my team and see what we come up with. And if you have more thoughts or ideas, if you sit in your editing bay and come up with something else, I'm pumped for how to apply it. Maybe I'll come up with I'll sit down with my team and fine tune it and then ping you and say, hey, here's what we came up with. What do you think?
Absolutely. Anytime, man. And let me just say, it's like, as we're wrapping up here, going back to that hero's journey a little bit. One of the things that's foundational to the hero's journey is the hero begins in what we call the ordinary world. Mm-hmm. It's life as normal. It's Neo in the Matrix sitting in his cubicle. Mm-hmm. Then there is a catalytic event that catapults the hero. If they're sometimes it's the call to adventure, some people call it, and the hero is catapulted into the extraordinary world or the special world. And that is where the obstacles happen. That's where the struggles happen. That's where the change happens. And once all that takes place, then the hero returns to the ordinary world and shares what he or she has learned to the rest of the people and invites them in on their own journey. And that is what happens a lot with the people that you profile. Mm-hmm. And I got to say, Matt, that's the story that you're living yourself right now. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I am, I just got to say, I am so stoked that you have decided to, that you've decided that, you need to step out and take more risks. You want to step up your game. You are, as the hero's journey talks about, the hero always meets guides and mentors along the way. You are engaging all sorts of mentors and guides to help you along your hero's journey. Including
Jeff. Here he is.
And it's a privilege to be here. It's a privilege to be part of it.
Yoda in the house.
Cool. I would do a Yoda impression at this point, but it would be really bad, so I won't. I have huge respect for what you're doing and how you're doing it, and I just want to take this opportunity to say that, like, you are always telling people to believe in themselves, but I just want to say that I see what you're doing, and I want to say that I believe in you.
Cool, man. That means a lot. Thank you. You gave me a lot. I got to digest all this. I took notes. I'm looking away from the camera because I'm like typing notes out to see how do we make this all happen, but I'm trying to be present with you too. While I'm
for sure.
What's over on this page. For people who want to find you, learn more about Jeff and your story and your advice and wisdom, where are they going?
They go to storygreenlight.com. That is the place to go.
And your YouTube channel, Story Greenlight. I watch every video. I comment on a huge chunk of the videos.
You do. You do.
Yeah. So I'm a fan. And I think anybody who's in YouTube and wants to become a better YouTuber, you'll learn a lot from watching Jeff's stuff.
Awesome.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you.
Absolutely, man.
If you want to see my last expert guest give me the 3D secret strategy to get more subs and growth, check out the video right there next to me. I think you'll enjoy it. Continue to believe, and I'll see you there.
YouTube is made up of 3 Ds. That's the way I kind of teach it.